Hello and welcome to episode 233 of the Boys in the Booth podcast. Today, it's myself, Chad Melbourne, joined by none other than John Kiriakou, everybody's favorite corporate lawyer. But let's be honest, John, that's not why you're here today. You're here to talk Maple Leafs. John used to work for the Maple Leafs as an intern for a summer directly under Kyle Dubas and all the gang there, Brendan Shanahan, Lou Lamoriello, etc. And he also scouted in the OHL for the Ottawa 67s for a bit. So, John, today we're going to be talking about the Maple Leafs' plans for the trade deadline. And we're just going to go through and talk about what we think they should do, because this is a really important year for the Maple Leafs. But before we get into it, how you doing, Johnny?
Doing well. Yeah, clock's ticking. What do we got? 6 days till the deadline.
It's coming up very, very quick.
Yeah, but Leafs have been looking good lately, so I think it's an interesting time for them, and conference seems to be, as wide open as I can remember it. So, interesting times ahead.
Yeah, very wide open. We were just talking about the standings before this. I can't remember a time when it's been this close, up and down, especially for those last two wildcard spots. It's really crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty tight. But I think for me, what I've been thinking about lately is perhaps it's the clearest path, not to, minimize any of the competition out there, because there's some great teams in the East, but, the Leafs have been as good as anybody in the conference, maybe aside from Washington, who's kind of running away from it this year. And, kind of reminds me a little bit of 2021, that COVID season where they ran into Montreal in the first round. And you look back and the hindsight was, wow, if they were just able to close on that path to the Cup final was pretty clear for them. And I think, obviously, as I said, Washington has been great, and you've got the two Florida teams who are two teams that are going to be hard to beat. But otherwise, it's as wide open as I think it's been as of late in the Eastern Conference here.
100%. You bring up that 2021 series, and that was the year I became a Seattle Kraken fan. So I don't know why we're talking about the Maple Leafs here. I'm a Seattle Kraken fan, but yeah, that was some heartbreak there. And, talking about the Florida teams, one thing off the top we just have to get out there is Tampa Bay is on an absolute heater right now. I think they've won either 8 or 9 in a row. Vasilevsky in all of those games has been stellar. I think he has about, last I looked, it was about a 945 save through those games. And so that's just terrifying, because that was a team that, as the years kind of gone on, this season, it felt like they kind of disappeared and went away. And now it's you look at the standings and you sort by points percentage, and they're barely behind the Maple Leafs. It's oh yeah, they're fully back. So that is just absolutely terrifying. But enough about the rest of the league here. Let's talk about the Maple Leafs, okay? Because that's what we're here to do, John. The first thing I wanted to do is just get into some grades for each position. So we're going to start with the forwards, then go to the defense, and then goaltenders. Let's just talk about how the season's gone so far, and give me a grade for the entire forward group, entire D-core, and the goaltenders. Let's start with the forwards.
It's a tough one. Obviously, the team has changed its playing style this year under Berube, and for the most part, I've liked it. I think they've been a little bit overall just harder to play against. A little bit more grit than I think we've seen in years past. But at the same time, they've had spells or times of the season where they've had trouble scoring. You see a guy like Austin Matthews, of course, he's had injury issues throughout the season, but still he's only got 21 goals. Is he gonna hit 30 on the season? I don't think it's I don't know. That's probably right around where the line is. So the offense seems to be down a little bit. But overall, I'd say I'm happy with them. They've played well enough to be a top or near the top of the division throughout most of the season. So hopefully they find a little bit more offense come playoff time. I think I'd be inclined to go with a B plus, given the mix of factors that I just mentioned.
Yeah, B plus isn't a bad grade. I'm in and around there. I gave them a B. So I'm a little less sold on the forward group this season. And it comes down to a few things. Number one, you said right off the top, it's Austin Matthews. He hasn't been himself this season. We know he's banged up, like he misses a game at the Four Nations face-off. He comes out in the final, and he's maybe the second best player on the ice behind Brady Tkachuk for that team. So he had an incredible game, but then, he comes back and he's in the Maple Leafs lineup, and all of a sudden he hasn't scored in, I think it's 9-10 games, something against a goalie.
5-on-5, yeah, or against a goalie, 5-on-5. I don't know what the stat is, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so the scoring, it has totally dried up, and now, they're looking elsewhere. And yeah, even though William Nylander is on pace to, have a career year in terms of goals, it feels like he's not inevitable every night like he used to be. And maybe that's just because, we're kind of in the dog days of the season here, and he'll start to ramp up. But historically for him, it's been sort of the opposite, right? Like he flies out of the gate, he has an incredible start to the year, and then tapers off a little bit. So that's a little bit concerning. The one guy you're not concerned about at all is Mitch Marner, especially after the Four Nations face-off break. He's been incredible, setting up the game winner for Canada. And then right after that, he's continued to roll. So the top six guys, you're happy you're getting more out of Nyes, you're happy you're getting more out of McMahon, but you just got to look at that bottom six, and that is the whole story.
BetterHelp is the paid partner of this video. The new year is a blank space for you to write a new story. BetterHelp makes it more convenient to get you started. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy more comfortable and convenient. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Your next chapter starts today. Get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp online therapy at betterhelp.com/boysinthebooth in paid partnership with BetterHelp.
We interrupt this podcast to tell you about one of our favorite partners, Sign Up Expert. If you're a sports bettor, whether brand new, casual, or hardcore, listen very carefully because this ad is for you. Guys, line shopping for the best odds matters, and that's why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books to maximize their profits. Thankfully, there has never been a better time to get signed up, and we are here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. When you use our link at signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth, you can get access to all of the top sports books in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Most importantly, all of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through our link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one, allowing you to start line shopping with an enhanced bankroll. Guys, it's simple. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful and profitable sports betting. So, if you want to take advantage of these incredible benefits and support our brand at the same time, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook through our link in the description below, signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. If you're planning on signing up for a new sportsbook anyways, you might as well use our link and support the boys. So, one more time, that's signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is sponsored by SeatGeek, the absolute best ticket app out there. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals to tickets at your favorite sporting event. SeatGeek does this awesome thing where they score each ticket out of 10 based on its value, so you know whether you're getting a good or a bad deal. Last time I got tickets to see the Devils play, I first saw red tickets. I waited it out, monitored the price in-app, and once I saw green, I pulled the trigger. SeatGeek makes it that easy. And here's the best part. SeatGeek has completely hooked us up. Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code BOYSINTHEBOOth in all caps. Click the link in our description to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BOYSINTHEBOOth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Yeah, the bottom six is something I was also just going to give some love to John Tavares too. Like this is a guy who's in year 7 of a 7-year deal. Certainly there was a lot of chatter when it was signed, and probably myself included, of people saying, "Oh, what's it going to look like in the last couple of years?" And the guy's been nothing but consistent, nothing but a 65+ point player every season through this deal, and it looks like it'll be the same this year.
Yeah.
So shout out to him for continuing to put up numbers, especially as he progresses toward his mid-30s. But you're right. My biggest issue with the team is the bottom six, and I think partly it's just it's almost highlighted a little bit by the Four Nations, and maybe it's unfair to do that because it's four teams of the best players. But you come back from the Four Nations and you just look at the bottom six of each team, and there's 32 teams in the league. It's hard to find players who are impactful every night. Like, I feel like you look around the league and there's just so many guys who are just guys playing on bottom sixes around the entire NHL. And I would love if, you think of that 2011 Boston Cup winning team and their fourth line of Paille, Campbell, and Thornton and how effective they are. But it seems like there just really isn't a ton of that anymore. Which is, maybe that's a whole separate rant, but looking at the Leafs specifically, yeah, there's some guys on that bottom six who don't quite fit in. Maybe there's some, I'm sure we'll talk about it. There's some duplicative players. Mm-hmm. There's some players who, they just don't really have the size or the grit that you might be looking for to play in that role. But given where the cap is right now, it's hard to address every single need on your team. Every team is lacking a little bit in some place, and that might be, depending on what happens this week, that might be the case for the Leafs.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You bring up the cap, and it's going up over the next 3 seasons. We know it's going up. We have relatively firm numbers. That it's going to grow over the next 3 years, which is going to be a good thing, I think, for the league, because then some of the richer teams, the Maple Leafs are one of them, are able to spend right to the cap, whereas some of the other teams who don't have as much cash flow coming in or as much support from their ownership group, I'm thinking of maybe, like a Columbus or a Buffalo, like they're going to have their own internal caps, and they likely won't be spending right to the very top. So maybe we see some separation there. The rich teams are actually able to, fill out their rosters a little bit more and try to buy a team that wins, although that never worked for the Maple Leafs before the cap. So I don't know why we think it would work now, but
they got closer than they have been in the last decade, at least. But
that's right. They did. Sticking on the forwards, and then we'll move to the D here. A final thought from me is, you mentioned that they're playing a bit of a different system under Craig Berube, and it looks like a hockey team that, can win in the playoffs. The style of play, to me, at least, given the eye test, seems more conducive to playoff winning. However, when you look at the underlying numbers, it is a little bit concerning, because the Maple Leafs have been a team year over year in the Auston Matthews era that are top 5, not only in goals, but expected goals as well. We knew coming into this year that they would probably lose some goals. We knew Matthews wasn't going to score 69 again. We knew that, they were losing Tyler Bertuzzi, who chipped in a little bit, and, some other players up front. You'd think you'd get a few back from Nyes, which they have. You'd think Bobby McMahon would be better, which he has been this season. But still, net negative in terms of goals. The expected goals is what worries me, because in terms of goals, they haven't dropped off that much, and we knew it was coming anyway, so it wasn't that crazy. But in terms of expected goals right now, they rank 21st in the NHL. They're just not generating the same chances that they used to. And you even see it when you look at the shots per game. This is a team that gets outshot nearly every game they play in, which is just so uncharacteristic of this group of players. And again, like, it comes back to the coaching. For whatever reason, they're getting these opportunistic goals, which they haven't in the past. So I'm just curious, like, do you think it is concerning that the underlying numbers don't look very favorably on this team, even though when you watch them play, it's like, oh yeah, like, I could see this working in the playoffs?
I mean, I'd say I'm mixed on it. Like, certainly, when you talk about expected goals, it's better to be higher up that list than not. You say they're 21st in the league. Yeah, that doesn't scream confidence to me. But at the same time, like trying to look past the numbers a little bit, like it's clear that the style they were playing previously just wasn't conducive to success in the playoffs because they didn't have any. So perhaps this is, playing this way, playing a little heavier, seeing a guy like Matthew Nyes, who kind of plays that north-south style, have more success under Berube. Perhaps it's more along the lines of what the right recipe may be. And that's what the hope has to be. I think there's obviously always a little bit of concern with the fact that, hey, if your expected goals are low, but you're winning games, like you're probably getting a lot of help from your goalies. And I think that's certainly been the case for the Leafs this year. Like both Wall and Stolarz have been, pretty solid all season without, not any sort of prolonged dips in play when both of them have been out at times.
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that you can expect to hold up? I feel pretty confident in them for, I feel like I've seen enough of them for this season. We're going into the playoffs. I'm like, yeah, you know what? I think at least one of the two of these guys can continue to play well, give them a chance to win. And that's great. Next season, like, do I expect Anthony Stolarz, for instance, who's been a career backup goalie, to put up the same numbers? No, not necessarily, unless perhaps this is also just a system that is more conducive to him having success. So I think if I were to see the expected goals drop off coupled with some more struggles in net, certainly I would be much more concerned. But I'm interested just to see how this plays out, how a different style plays out, because you're right. I think this way that they're playing and the way that they've looked throughout the season, at least eye test wise, to me, it appears more similar to the teams that they've continuously lost to in the playoffs year after year.
100%. The thing, like, just a quick counter to that, you look at some of the best teams right now in terms of expected goals for in the league, and it's Edmonton, Vegas, Florida. I mean, Pittsburgh and Carolina are in there, and I don't think, you look at Pittsburgh and think that they're the model for success, but.
Well, in Edmonton, hey, like, their expected goals, that's great. Leon Draisaitl's leading the league by a lot with 44. Like, that's all fantastic, but they can't get a save.
Yeah, that's right.
And the bottom four on defense, like I'm maybe as big of an Ekholm fan as there is. But the rest of that D, like, I should mention Bouchard. Like, I like Bouchard, but he's not exactly a star in his own zone. And then it gets really thin after that, like between Emberson and Stetcher and Kulak and so, Klingberg, so on and so forth. Like, that's, like, I think I'd be much more concerned with what's going on out there.
100%. Okay, so we've kind of touched on D and goalie, but let's do a grade for the D core so far. What do you think?
I think I'm going to go with a B for the defense. And again, it's been mixed this year because one of the bigger complaints or bigger issues about the Leafs D core this year is the lack of offense they get from it. And that's been a struggle at times. We've seen Morgan Rielly have his struggles on both sides of the puck, quite frankly, this season as well. And he's a key guy. On paper, he's your number one defenseman. You want to see him succeed. And he's a guy, even though he's had his struggles at time this year, I think I'm still pretty confident in. We've seen him raise his game come playoff times in the past. So that's the negative side of things. On the positive side of things, like, McCabe and Tanev is about as solid a pair as the Leafs have had in recent times. And I think are exactly the type of guys that you want on your side come playoff time. They're mean, they're physical, they're smart in their own zone. They're just kind of those grizzled veterans where you feel confident any time that they're out on the ice. And so I think that's been a great pairing, a great find for them this season, and instills a lot of confidence from me. The third pairing, I think, perhaps there's, and we'll talk about when we talk about our potential moves here, but perhaps there's some moves to be made to just kind of shore up the depth of the back end. Certainly I think they would have envisioned Yanni Hakanpää having played more than 2 games this season.
Yeah.
And that just hasn't been the case. So, perhaps there's an opportunity to bring in someone, who can kind of be your 6-7. But overall, I'd say, yeah, I'm like really, really happy from a defensive standpoint of things on that back end. The offense from the point has been lacking. So I think a B is an appropriate answer from my perspective.
Yeah, and I agree. I went a little bit higher. I gave them a B plus, only because, juxtaposing this with the forward core, the underlying numbers actually match the eye test when it comes to the D core here. In terms of expected goals against at 5-on-5 this season, they're 7th best in the league, which is pretty good, pretty telling. And, like under Sheldon Keefe, who didn't have some of the personnel to work with, there were some pretty good defensive teams. But it just hasn't felt like this. Like the numbers would always look good on those Keefe teams, but it just hasn't felt like, that, like it just hasn't been to a point in the past where they've had guys who can move a body out front, and you feel confident with your top pair of Tanev and McCabe just locking it down. So I gave him a B plus. I think it's been really good so far this season. The one thing I will say is that, yes, I mean, the bottom pair, that's something that will have to be addressed. But once Tanev goes down and once OEL goes down, like you realize it gets pretty damn thin, and you're relying on Morgan Rielly to carry a top pair again, which, we've been there, done that. Like it doesn't work. You need more bodies to surround him with. So if Tanev is out of the lineup and OEL's out of the lineup, then it's like, you've got McCabe playing on his offside, and it just doesn't feel right. So I'm thankful that those injuries aren't going to be long-term. I still think you could add to this D-core, but assuming everyone's healthy come playoff time, I think it's the best D-core this group has had in the Austin Matthews era. So B plus for me.
I agree. Yeah. I like that D-core.
Okay. Goalies. This has been the big story all year. I'll start you off with my grade right away. A plus. I don't know if it could be better. Like, honestly, going into this season, did we really expect any other team or any other did we really expect any goalie on this team to be as good as they are? The answer is no. We didn't think Joseph Woll was going to be as good as he is, and especially Anthony Stolarz, who you mentioned before, has been a career backup. So it's been a total breath of fresh air. And even though, they're still giving up a few chances, like they've just been solid all year long. And it gives confidence in the team that even though they're not, generating as much offense, they're still confident in winning those games, 3-2 or 2-1. And it shows, they haven't blown a lead this season after being up after 2 periods. They haven't done that one time this year. So that's, something really nice. And that is credit to those 2 goaltenders. So A plus for me. I don't know how it could be any better.
Yeah, I mean, didn't give me much to argue with there. Just for the sake of being a bit of a contrarian, I'll give an A, though. Just, these guys have been fantastic. I don't have enough good things to say. But I'll go a shade below you just because neither of these guys are going to win the Vezina this year, and that's perhaps the only thing that could make it better is if that were the case. So yeah, I'll go with an A.
Okay. The reason I was having such trouble trying to get my words out there is because I'm also looking on the side here, like just it's always, we need a producer here so I can keep my train of thought, but also look at my screen because I wanted to bring this up as well. Look at what I've got sorted here. Goals against above expected. So these teams have the best goaltending in the league, according to Money Puck right now, based on their expected goals model. So you look at Toronto in 5th right there. That means combined Stolarz and Woll have saved 22 goals above expected. Winnipeg up there, number 2. Anaheim at number 1 is crazy.
Strange. John Gibson and Dostal
Dostal has been so good now for a couple years, and Gibson has had a resurgence. But for whatever reason, a team like Edmonton still does not want him, which doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, so you look at this, and it's like, could you really ask for much better than fifth in the league in terms of goals saved above expected? No, like it's just been it's been incredible. So
all you ask, hey, you're a goalie. Like all you ask is that your goalies give you a chance to win, and every single night, for the most part this season, the goalies on this team have done that.
exactly, which is more than we can say about our Division C men's league team.
Yeah,
But
we'll talk about that another time.
yeah, or never again. Let's never bring that up because, yeah, it's not good. Okay, I want to move on now. Let's briefly talk about the Seth Jones trade to Florida. Spencer Knight in a first are the return. God, why did it have to be Florida, John?
Yeah, I've got some opinions on this. First of all, from a Florida perspective, I think I like this move overall. Perhaps you wish that Chicago had retained more than 25%. Like if you could have got to retain, such that maybe Seth Jones is like a $5.5 million defenseman, like that maybe is better from your perspective. But taking that out, like Seth Jones is going into a situation now where he's not going to be playing 25 minutes a night. He's not going to be relied on as your number one defenseman. And we've seen that, with this team and this exact team in the past, where you bring in a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who was bought out in Vancouver with a pretty hefty price tag, and he comes in and he's able to play more as a kind of bottom three guy. And he really excelled in that role. And I think Seth Jones will, I think he'll go in and probably be a second pairing guy there, but he's going to have more around him. The expectations are going to be less. Certainly more of a support system there. So I think it's going to be really good from the Panthers' perspective, just to bring in a guy with that experience, that size, that puck moving ability, and have him not be your number one. From a Chicago perspective, I guess two things on this. One, obviously you had to get him out. It was clear that he wanted out. He'd started to be pretty vocal in the media. Not a great thing to have on a young team, to have a disgruntled guy like that in the locker room. I think bringing in a goalie, I guess I should say three things then from a Chicago perspective. Second thing is bringing in a goalie like Spencer Knight. He's got upside. He's still a young guy. I think it's a relatively low risk move for them, especially given their sheer lack of depth in that position. So they'll give him a chance to turn his stripes in the NHL, and it's clear that he kind of fell out of favor in Florida, and that just wasn't going to be the case there. So I think it's a good opportunity for Chicago to take a gamble on a younger guy and see if he can run with that job. My third thing, though, is from Chicago, and this has been the case for a while now with them, where I just get so confused with the moves that they make, and it goes back to even last month when they traded Taylor Hall as part of that ran-in deal, where they continue to trade bodies on their roster, veteran bodies on the roster, and they don't bring back any players in return. Like, what are you expecting from Connor Bedard and your young guys there to, you continue to sell off pieces and whether it's, whoever it is, like whether it's this season where you trade Seth Jones and Taylor Hall, or even, a few seasons ago where you're trading guys like Brandon Hagel or Kirby Doc or,
DeBrincat even.
Like, I don't understand what is going on in Chicago and what the expectations are. And it's been all season. I've been so confused, where Kyle Davidson comes out and he fires Luke Richardson halfway through the season. And he says, I expected us to be, higher in the standings than whatever he said at the time. They were 31st or something like that, 32nd. Like, what do you expect? What do you expect from this team? Like, you've put nothing there. You trade guys and you bring nothing back. Connor Bedard he looks a little bit lost out there. And I think it's not, like a bit of a sophomore slump, coupled with the fact he just has nothing really to play with. Like, he's playing with Ryan Donato and Flagert. Like,
yeah, it's not good.
I have no idea what the direction is there. I think it's frankly, I think they're just lost. And like, hey, if we're looking at this trade in a vacuum, like, is this the right move, trading Seth Jones, where he's just got such a high cap hit and you're more so just looking to move him out? Like, is that the right trade to be saying, okay, we should have brought in, a top prospect or a roster player? Like, maybe not. But to me, like, this is just, it's just kind of a compounding effect where this is another move where you trade a veteran off of your roster. And sure, you brought in Spencer Knight. But like, other than that, there's nothing where I say this makes your roster better. So now you just got Connor Bedard out there on more of an island than perhaps he was 2 days ago.
Yeah,
Is that I don't know. I don't know if that's overly critical of the Blackhawks, but I'm completely lost by their direction.
Dude, I totally agree with that take. And I brought it up a few weeks ago on the podcast when they traded Taylor Hall. I said, why do you need to get rid of this body? Like, and you're not even getting a good return. It's like you're just giving a body away. A guy who, by the way, was a first overall pick and can relate to a certain extent to Connor Bedard and can sort of help him through the struggles of a sophomore slump or playing on a team where you're not surrounded by high-end talent. So I don't know, like that made no sense to me. And the Seth Jones one.
And the timing is all off too, because and now we're on a tangent. I'm so riled up where like you look back at the Taylor Hall trade and all they bring in is a third round pick is I think what they got.
Yeah.
So you bring in a third round pick. Like, wasn't the time to make those types of deals 2 years ago? Because that third round pick now is even if you hit and that third round pick plays, which is like far from a guarantee, as
5 years from now, if it hits.
Yeah, like, even being generous, let's be generous and say it's 3 years from now. Like, Connor Bedard is 23 years old at that time. Like, he's now well into his prime, and he brought up some prospect who's probably also, like, it's a third round pick. He's probably not a superstar. Like, is this not now the time to start to accumulate some actual players who you can slot in with him and bring up with him? Like, it just seems like there's a lot of nothing going on there, and I fear that it's going to be Connor Bedard at 27 years old there with still nothing really around him.
Yeah, I fear it's going to be Connor Bedard playing first line center in 2 years for a different team, maybe the Vancouver Canucks. Like it feels like they are just totally neglecting. Like,
can we talk about the Vancouver Canucks for a second? I know I'm on a real tangent, but you mentioned the Canucks and like,
okay, yeah, go.
I just wanted to say, like, Elias Pettersson, man, like
terrible. Dude, when we watched him at the Four Nations, like, just awful body language, awful play on the ice, like just didn't look good from the start. And then you watch JT Miller the other night against the Leafs and it's like, oh yeah, like he bangs bodies, gets pucks on net, like does everything you want from a hockey player,
Yeah, so he looks like he just isn't interested in playing right now. And I can say a lot more. I know I'm like getting off the rails a little bit, so I'll reserve judgment as much as I can. But you're right, like it's not good out there. To bring it back to Chicago, it's not looking good there. So the Jones trade, it's good for him. He's on a contending team. He's out of Chicago. For the Blackhawks, I'm like, you know what? Hopefully Knight hits. Hopefully he's a starting goalie like he was projected to be a couple years ago.
Yeah.
But I'm not left with a ton of confidence that that's going to help them much in the long term.
Yeah, and you talk about direction. We'll wrap up on Chicago. We've been on a tangent here, but you talk about direction, and it's like, yeah, this is the time to start bringing in players. And it's like, they did that. They started to do that, like they brought in Taylor Hall. They signed guys like, Mikheyev and Brody and Tyler Bertuzzi. And it's like, they started filling in around, and then now they're just trading everyone. And it's like, if they're what is their timeline here? Do they want to be good in 3 years? If that's the plan, then keep Seth Jones. I know he's overpaid, but keep him until then,
or you trade him and you say, I don't know, like, it's hard to think off the top of my head, but you look at the Panthers roster, you say, I need a player who's going to play on my roster. Like, whether it's Sam Miskevich or just something, like I'm just throwing out random names where this is a guy who's, even if it's a bottom six player, just somebody who helps us take the tiniest of steps forward.
Yeah.
and again, like maybe it's not completely fair because maybe Spencer Knight does help that, but
I mean,
again,
he's played 23 games this year. He's got a 907, a 240 goals against, you know?
yeah, like, do I have more? Am I more confident in their goaltending than I was yesterday? Yeah, definitely. Like their goaltending has improved, but the purpose of my kind of rant here is just because of the fact that they continue to just put nothing around Connor Bedard. And you talk about timeline, it's hard to say because do I look at that team and say they're going to be good in 3 years? Absolutely not. I
Yeah.
would actually bet that they're probably not good in 3 years the way that they're going.
Yeah.
Hopefully, or else maybe that changes come this offseason. You throw a pile of money at somebody, but
Yeah. It could be a Rantanen or a Marner or someone, or a Kaprizov the following year. There's already been rumblings about that. But let's focus on, like, just quickly, the Seth Jones part of this trade. Like, what does that mean for the Atlantic Division now? And also, I'd like you to share how high you are on Seth Jones, dating back to the 2013 NHL draft. Now, okay, just to preface this, I'm only bringing this up, John, because now we're about 30 minutes into the show.
Yeah.
Any listener still listening knows that you're now, an intelligent guy who has good hockey takes, but I want to take you back to the 2013 NHL draft and Seth Jones.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what you're referencing there. What Chad is getting at is, going back a long time now, but did a couple of hits back in the day on CTV's morning show Canada AM at the time, including they did a draft preview at one time, and I infamously, between me and Chad, that is, infamously went on there and told the world that I would take Seth Jones first overall that year, including over McKinnon, and hopefully nobody's able to dig that one up. That's just a bad take.
Yeah, it might have never happened even. Like we can't confirm.
Well, yeah, but for me bringing it up and just openly admitting to making that having that take several years ago, you would have never known, but I did. I have to own that. But
I was just going to bring that up to tease, but yeah. Anyway,
I got to own that. Hey, you know what? Everyone has bad takes, and that was unfortunately one that I had to make on TV. So yeah, but focusing on the 2025 versions of these players and Seth Jones in particular. What does it mean for the Atlantic Division? Well, it just means that a team that was already a contending team and a top team in this division got deeper. Their defense, Florida's defense, is better than it was yesterday, and so that's like, hey, you're gonna have to deal with that. Like if you want to make it to a cup final, you want to win a cup, you're gonna have to. When I talk about the Leafs, you're gonna have to get through the Panthers one way or another, and their second pair, which I imagine he's going to be playing on, is better than what you were projecting before this trade. So, you got to find a way to get at him and rattle him a bit. He's a guy that he's a big guy, but he likes to hold on to the puck and move the puck, and so you got to forecheck him and put him under some pressure. But like you've got that Florida D there in front of you. I like that. I like that decor.
Yeah, I mean, Forsling, Ekblad, Mikkola, Jones, like, not going to be fun to play against. I just wonder now what this means for Tkachuk. Like, if that means that he has to go LTIR or how the money works, because, they did retain 25% on Jones, but he's still making $7 million. So it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that. But
yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Panthers aren't overly concerned. Like, I'm sure they're concerned a little bit about the injury, but
yeah,
assuming that there's a little Vegas Golden Knights going on here and he's back for game one of the playoffs, like I wouldn't be concerned about Matthew Tkachuk being ready for game one.
Yeah, he'll play whether he has broken ribs or not. He'll play. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the rest of the league, in particular the Atlantic Division and the Florida Panthers. But now, knowing all of this, and by the way, another wrinkle in the Maple Leafs plans is Calle Jarnkrok is going to be back tomorrow, so that's interesting for the bottom six. But
I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah. So that came out maybe only an hour ago now. But my question to you is, what do you think the Maple Leafs deadline philosophy should be, without getting into names and assuming that, they're going to add between 1 and 3 players? Let's not get crazy here. What do you think the philosophy should be? Should they add a big fish at one position, whether that's forward or defense? Should they add multiple bottom 6 forwards? Should they add maybe a middle 6 forward and a bottom pair defenseman? Like, if it's you, John, you're making the moves.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest needs for this team, and what should their philosophy be going into the deadline on Friday?
I think it's 2 things. First one being like recognizing this team doesn't have a lot of cap space. Like, you're not in a position where you're going to be trading. Like, they're not going to trade for Mikko Rantanen. You're not bringing in a big fish at the deadline. Like, you have your big fish. It's the guys that they have on this team who you expect to lead you into the playoffs. So that's what you got. But what you need is to recognize that when it comes to the playoffs, it's a hard game. Guys get injured, and it's a next man up mentality. So I think priority number 1 is just building your depth. Have a little bit more confidence in your bottom 6. Have a bit more confidence in your bottom defensive pairing. Like, those are the types of guys that I think, A, they can afford to bring in, and B, that are going to be available. Second one is, and it kind of is coupled with the first, is just focusing on bringing in guys who give you a bit of a different element. You see it in the Four Nations face-off recently with Matthews, Marner, and Nylander, who were there. Like, these guys are what they are. They all kind of have the same personality and the same temperament. They're not in-your-face guys. None of them were, the guys in, at least in the case of Matthews and Marner, none of those guys, or neither of those guys, I should say, were going to be dropping the gloves off the opening draw. Like, they're kind of calm, cool, collected. They don't ever really seem to snap. And part of the thing that I've liked as much as I have about the Leafs team this year is having a little bit of that different element. And I think a lot of that comes from that McCabe-Tanev pairing, where it's just a couple grizzled veterans who know how to move bodies, and they're physical, and they take runs at guys from time to time. And I think that's effective come playoff time. Like, obviously your top guys have to be your top guys, and that's who's going to win. And it's not going to be, Calle Yarncroke winning the Conn Smythe Trophy. Like, it's going to be, if they get there, it's going to be Matthews, Marner, Nylander, probably one of those 3.
Yeah.
But just having
maybe Stolarz.
Yeah, Foley's. Yeah, who knows? But just having a little bit of a different element in your lineup of some guy who's just, going to go out there and take a run at a guy, or just, snow the goalie, something to just kind of get under the skin of the opponent, because that's so effective come playoff time when the animosity just steps up.
Yeah, and I really agree with your assessment. It's like they don't have the assets or the cap space, or really the want, in my opinion, to go out and get a guy who is going to replace one of your top 6 players. I think what is going to happen is they're probably going to go out and try to get a third line center, a guy maybe who can bump up in the middle 6 and go back and forth between that second and third line when you need him to. Maybe he kills penalties, who knows? But I think that's the type of player they're going to target. No surprise there. That's what everyone's been talking about for the last, months, actually dating back really to the start of the season. Like, that was a clear need. They talked about trying William Nylander at center again for the second year. It lasted.
Year, it feels like the 4th year in a row or that.
Yeah, and again, like, no surprise to anyone, it lasted about 2 seconds. And then on the back end, at the start of the year, you had a guy like Liljegren there. You had Timmins step up and kind of take his spot, and Simon Benoit has been good. But lately, Benoit, Timmins, Myers, like, no matter who you have in the lineup there, just doesn't feel like you're comfortable enough with 2 of those guys in your lineup every single night, let alone 3 when they've got injuries. So you definitely need to add someone there. Both of those adds, I mean, I don't anticipate adding a depth defenseman will be overly expensive. I feel like those guys are in abundance. You just have to make the money work. And it's something that they do almost every year. It might cost a 3rd round pick or something like that, maybe a 2nd if you get a guy who is, of more value. But I think getting the center is going to be a little difficult, especially because it really feels like a seller's market this year where there are so many teams at the top who need to add, especially a center or a forward in general who can make an impact. And it just feels like there could be a bit of a bidding war here. And I don't know if the Maple Leafs are comfortable giving up some of their top pieces like a Fraser Minton, like an Easton Cowan, or even that first round pick next year, which, by the way, a lot of people are talking about that first round pick next year having more value than a first round pick this year, because this draft, by all accounts, after about the 18 to 20 mark in the first round, really drops off. And that's what a lot of scouts are saying. So, those late firsts might not be as important or as valuable this year as they will be next year. So that's something to consider. And I think that's a good thing for the Maple Leafs. Would be crazy to trade that pick. And, then all of a sudden next year, you don't have a Marner or Tavares. They go somewhere else and you're struggling. And, obviously you'd want to protect it in the top 10 or something, but it's a scary thought. I don't think we'll get to that point with the Maple Leafs next season, no matter who's on their team, but it is a scary thought. So those are some of the pieces. I don't know if they're comfortable dealing them. It might have to be for the right player, and that's what I want to talk about now. Let's target some players here, and we're just going to run down the list of, the TSN trade bait list and the Sportsnet one as well, and just kind of talk about like if it's reasonable or if they have the assets to do a deal and maybe try to mock up a few deals here. We've already mentioned that Mikko Rantanen is not going to be a guy that's targeted. And let's take some of the other wingers off the board here, because I don't think that that's what the Maple Leafs are going to do. A guy like Brad Marchand is on the board. I just don't know if I see him moving. Brock Besser is another guy who's on the board. Again, I just don't think it fits what Toronto needs. But in terms of centers, the usual suspects here, we've got Brock Nelson, Scott Lawton, Braden Shen, Ryan Donato, Trent Frederick, Nick Bjugstad. Dylan Cousins is an interesting one. Gus Nyquist just got dealt. So I don't know, those are some names there. What do you think, John? Who is your favorite guy out of that list, and what would you be comfortable moving to acquire that player?
BetterHelp is the paid partner of this video. The new year is a blank space for you to write a new story. BetterHelp makes it more convenient to get you started. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy more comfortable and convenient. They carefully make sure therapists on the platform are well qualified, and their customer support team is there to help you if you have any questions. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform you can trust. Your next chapter starts today. Get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp online therapy at betterhelp.com/boysinthebooth in paid partnership with BetterHelp.
We interrupt this podcast to tell you about one of our favorite partners, Sign Up Expert. If you're a sports bettor, whether brand new, casual, or hardcore, listen very carefully because this ad is for you. Guys, line shopping for the best odds matters, and that's why any profitable sports bettor needs to be using multiple sports books to maximize their profits. Thankfully, there's never been a better time to get signed up, and we're here to connect you with the best promotions industry-wide. When you use our link at signupexperts.com/boysinthebooth, you can get access to all the top sportsbooks in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Most importantly, all of these sportsbooks have valuable sign-up offers for new users, and when you register through our link, you will automatically receive the top offer at each one, allowing you to start line shopping right away with an enhanced bankroll. Guys, it's simple. When you use multiple sportsbooks, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful and profitable sports betting. So if you want to take advantage of these incredible benefits and support our brand at the same time, please consider signing up for your next sportsbook through the link in the description down below, signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. If you're planning on signing up for a new sportsbook anyways, you might as well use the link and support the boys. So one more time, that's signupexpert.com/boysinthebooth. This podcast is also sponsored by the absolute best ticket app out there, SeatGeek. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, making it quick and easy to get the best deals on tickets to your favorite sporting events. SeatGeek does this awesome thing where they score each ticket out of 10 based on its value, so you know if you're getting a good or a bad deal. If the tickets are green, for example, you better act quick and secure those things because that's a good deal. But if the tickets are red, maybe wait a bit before pulling the trigger and monitor the price in the app. SeatGeek just makes it way too easy. Anyway, here's the best part though. SeatGeek has completely hooked us up. Boys in the Booth listeners get $20 off their first purchase on SeatGeek with the promo code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. So click the link in the description down below to download the app, and remember to get your discounted tickets using the code BoysInTheBooth in all caps. Get great seats for a fraction of the cost with SeatGeek.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, as you kind of were speaking to just a moment ago, about the price, and I think a lot of that is just given the fact that the points are tight. There's not a lot of defined sellers at the moment. There's a lot of teams who still think that they're in it, might be wavering in terms of which direction they go. You know, you look at, say, Boston or Ottawa or the Islanders, like so on and so forth.
Yeah, Vancouver, Calgary.
Yeah, like there's a lot of those teams kind of in that 7 to 11 spot where they just don't really, know which way they're going to go. And that's certainly driving the price up. And you hear these rumors of when I Brayden Schenn, for instance, and I see the talk of like, oh, they want a first round pick plus for Brayden Schenn. Like a first, like for a third line center, I don't think I would ever be comfortable, handing that kind of price over. Maybe absent some exceptional circumstances. So for me, I think it's looking at who's cost effective, what the price is of course going to take to bring in a guy like that, and third, going back to what I was saying before, like does this give you an element that you don't already have in your lineup? And for me, I think the guy that I'd be looking to that checks a few of those boxes is a guy like Scott Laughton, and I've been a big fan of him since he was an Oshawa General back in his OHL days. And he's a guy that just he's gritty, he's hard to play against. He's kind of bounced between the third and fourth line in Philly, but I think he's somebody that I would feel comfortable putting into that third line center spot on the Leafs. I don't think if you're looking for someone who can jump up and be your second line center, that's not him. But he's got a $3 million cap hit. He's got one more. Yeah, he's got one more season.
Yeah.
At that price, so you got some control, and I haven't heard much in terms of what the price might be to get him out of Philly, but I would suspect that it's probably much less than what St. Louis would be asking for Brayden Schenn. So I think that's the guy that I would be looking to, primarily. In terms of other guys, like I think Schenn it doesn't really make sense. Like he's got 3 years left at 6.5. The price seems like it's going to be pretty high. Like I think the world of Brayden Schenn. He's a great player. He's a guy who can bounce between your second and third line center. He's a captain, like fantastic. But I just don't think the money works. I don't think the price is right. I don't think the remaining term is right either. So I just don't see it being a fit. Brock Nelson to me is an interesting one as well. Brock Nelson, despite the fact that he's 78 years old.
Looks like an 85-year-old gym teacher in that photo.
As I called him during the Four Nations face-off playing in 1912. But he's another guy where he's pretty heavy. He's had some good offensive seasons. Again, could slot into that second, third line role. He's a UFA at the end of the season, which is enticing. And then I think he's got a $6 million cap hit. So you're going to have to do some math and some gymnastics on that one. But at least it's only for the rest of the season. It's easier to make that work than needing St. Louis to retain 50% of Brayden Schenn's salary for the next 3 seasons.
Yeah. Which I doubt would happen, by the way.
Yeah, like it's not going to happen. And so, yeah, I think that's one that I would point to and say, if you're looking for a guy to maybe to have more of an impact and be able to play in your bottom or your top six, unlike what I think Scott Laughton can offer, then I think that's a good guy to go to. But I don't think he's a guarantee to move. Like there's talk for whatever reason. I don't think it's justified, but there's talk that the Islanders still think that they've got a shot. And so, who knows what Lou might be thinking there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. There are a lot of names on this board that aren't necessarily the most attractive. And, you're focusing on a guy like Scott Laughton.
Yeah.
I just don't think a guy like that moves the needle at all. Like, you'd love to have him on your third line, but then what? You've got him, Yarncroke, maybe Domi as a third line. Like that's, that's fine.
But my counter is, okay, so somebody who moves the needle. So like, who moves the needle on this list besides Rantanen or Besser? Like,
yeah, and that's the thing. Like,
move the needle. I don't like. Maybe like, are you going to give up? Are you going to give a first round pick and a prospect for Brayden Schenn?
That's the thing, and you have to justify, the price. And do you want to move on from a guy like Fraser Minton or Easton Cowan?
No,
like
the answer is no.
Yeah, for a Brayden Schenn. But see, like, and I'm not even saying Brayden Schenn is the player that they need. I'm not saying he fixes everything for the Maple Leafs, but if you get him retained, maybe he's a $5 million player and he's your 3C going forward. And John Tavares, signs a new deal and he's your 2C going forward. And you can kind of interchange those guys as they age. And, so it kind of fixes a bit of a long-term issue rather than just getting a rental player like Laughton. And, because he's been a captain and because he's won a Stanley Cup, like it just feels like, I don't know, it just feels like a guy who could make more of an impact. With that being said, I don't know if the price makes sense at all because it's going to be a lot. And St. Louis isn't just going to trade him for the sake of trading him because he brings that room together clearly as the captain. So
yeah, and they're not exactly like, I think they're going to be a seller. Like they should be a seller. They're not that good of a team, but they're also kind of in that range I was talking about before, where they I don't think it's a guarantee that they're selling. Like they may very well, find that. Like they don't have to trade Brayden Schenn. Like he's got 3 years left. Like it could be something that happens in the off season. Who knows? But I'll also just kind of throw out the point here. That let's say hypothetically they do trade for Brayden Schenn and they hypothetically re-sign John Tavares at whatever. I don't care what the price is. Like let's just say that those two things happen. And let's also move past this season. So you're going into next season and your top 3 centers are Austin Matthews, who will be 28 years old.
Yep.
I think to the start of next season. John Tavares, who's 34 years old. Brayden Schenn, who's currently 33 years old. Like the 33 and 34-year-olds don't win Stanley Cups anymore. Like, sure, teams have them, but like you don't really have a team full of them win the cup, at least in, from what I can remember in past few years. So like, does that scream a lot of confidence? Like to me, if I see those are your top 3 centers going into next season, sure, they're all, great players. I think highly of all of those guys, as everybody should, but like, just like, it just seems they're old. They'd be old.
That's right. But then the alternative to that is, then next season on your third line, if you don't trade for a guy like Brayden Schenn, you've got Fraser Minton as, a 21, 22-year-old, whatever he is. And does that give you a lot of confidence as a third line center? Like you don't see a lot of third line players on cup winning teams, an exception or young third line players on a cup winning team, I should clarify. An exception for me is a guy like Anton Lundell in Florida, who just came right into the league, knew exactly where he was going to play, got to learn from from Barkov, and now he's baby Barkov. And so that was just like a perfect fit, match made in heaven. But so I don't know.
I like, and we're getting into a different discussion now, but I like Minton. Like, you know what? Maybe at 21 years old, I don't know exactly what role he's stepping into next season, but I do think he's on this team next season. And I think
Totally agree.
I think whether it's next season or the season after, I think he's the third line center on this team.
Yeah.
And I certainly would. I think just the way the game is played now, I think I'd let's ignore next season, but the season after, would I rather have the 36-year-old third line center or a 22-year-old third line center? I'm going to take the 22-year-old.
Yeah, and that's fair. And like, listen, there's
be equal. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, there are other avenues too. They can always go sign a guy in the offseason, or maybe it is a Scott Lawton who they're able to bring back and he's your third line center. Who knows? But at the end of the day, they need to improve, right? Other teams around them are improving, and it's not going to be good enough to go into the playoffs with this same group. And I'm a little scared because I feel like the Leafs management group here is going to look at, a guy like Max Pacioretty coming back, a guy like Calle Jarnkrok coming back, and they're going to want to give those guys runway and treat it sort of like your own little addition. And I'm just worried that they're not going to want to pay any sort of price to meaningfully upgrade the team. And if you're not doing that, just like they didn't do that last year, then I just feel like you're wasting another year, especially because it is a year in the East where the path to the Cup is clearer than ever. And again, like, not to disparage any of those other teams, but and not to bring it full circle and talk about the 2021 season again, where the path to the Cup was clear. But I just like, it just feels like a waste if they bring these guys in, a guy like Jarnkrok or Pacioretty or whoever who comes back into the lineup, and they treat it as, here you go, like here's an addition. That being said, I am really excited to see what a guy like Jarnkrok will do to this team. It seems like they're going to start him playing center tomorrow on the third line, so we'll see how that goes. But I don't know. I think you've got to be bold at this deadline. I think you've got to move on from a guy like Max Domi, even if it makes sense. Like, if you're bringing in money that that you need to fit, even though the fit for Max Domi is kind of great on this team. Obviously his dad playing here and he bleeds blue and white. Like, it just, he loves being a Toronto Maple Leaf. But at the end of the day, like, he hasn't been producing this season, and he's a bit of a liability defensively. So that's an upgrade. That's a spot where I look at where it's like, as tough as it would be to trade that guy away, if you can upgrade that position, it feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, like, hey, everyone loves the story. Everyone, likes how hard he works. Like, there's not much negative to say about Max Domi, but this, like, it's not a fit. It wasn't a fit last year. Start at the end of the season, like, he's playing with Austin Matthews and he caught lightning in a bottle and looked good, and they re-signed him this year. But he's got 3 goals. He's not a centerman. They've tried him there. He's not a fit. He doesn't really fit in your top 6. He doesn't really fit in your bottom 6. He's just kind of a guy. So yeah, absolutely. If there's a chance to upgrade on that, then I think do it. With Jarnkrok, yeah, I'm excited to see him too. I think Jarnkrok he's been a Swiss Army knife for this team in the past. And I think obviously he's hopping on a moving train 3/4 into the season. Like, that's tough to do, but I think he's been a good part of this team in years past, and I'm hopeful that at least him coming back can push some guys, whether it's a Holmberg or whether it's a Robertson or guys like that, push them down the lineup a little bit. And Pacioretty, I think, like, hey, you've seen enough of him this year. He's been a good physical presence, but largely, like, not somebody who's really fit nicely anywhere in your lineup. So, like, I don't think that they're going to view him as an own rental coming back.
Sure hope not.
Perhaps. But I agree with you. Like, I think if there's hey, this is your opportunity. Sure. Like, the team exists beyond this year, and you don't want to be completely, like, mortgaging your future, needlessly, but you have an opportunity here where it's wide open. You've got a good team. They're going to finish first or second in their division, most likely. Like, yeah, you should be bold and you should go for it, but what's realistic? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to hammer home is, like, here's some guys that I think are realistic at a realistic price tag. And they're not they're not Mikko Rantanen, but
They're
like,
not sexy names.
yeah,
That's for
they're
sure.
not, but that's what's available. Like, there's not a lot of nice names out there that are available.
Okay, quickly, let's talk about the defensemen on the market right now, and then we'll put together our ideal lineup going into playoffs, and then we'll wrap up so we can watch the Leafs game here. Puck drop, I would assume, will be in about 10-15 minutes, so we can get this done in the next 5 or so. Some of the D on the board right now, you're looking at a guy like Carson Soucy out in Vancouver, Ristolainen in Philadelphia, Connor Murphy in Chicago. Those are 3 guys that come to mind right off the top. Any of those guys interest you? Is there someone else that maybe caught your eye?
Yeah, like, sure. Like, in a vacuum, all 3 of those guys interest me. I think Soucy, he's been fine in Vancouver, but I think, prior to that, like, he's a big body, and he's making, I think his cap it's $3 million or something in and around there.
Yeah,
like,
3.3.
Yeah, like, I think he's a solid player. Ristolainen's been good in Philadelphia. Murphy, like, he's obviously playing on a horrendous Chicago team, but like, he's been a pretty stable presence on that team for a while now, and he's also pretty sizable guy who can move the puck. Like, I like all 3 of those guys, but like, where's the fit? It's like, you have 1.4 whatever the cap space is that the Leafs have.
Not much.
You're not going to move a ton of money out. Like, maybe it's a Domi, maybe it's a Robertson. Like, those are the types of guys you're probably looking at trading out. And assuming that you try and allocate the majority of that cap space to a centerman, a third line centerman, that doesn't leave you with much to spend on D. So you're probably looking at, realistically, like, none of those 3 guys that you threw out, because you're probably looking at a guy who's making $1 million, maybe slightly over that, who's going to be, who maybe pushes Connor Timmins to be a 7 and like plays with Benoit and kind of comes in and out of the lineup. Like, I think that's, again, not, I don't know exactly who that is. There's no one off the top of my head where I'm like, that's the guy you got to go for, but it's probably a guy who's making $900K somewhere on a team that's looking to sell, and he comes in and just gives you a little bit more depth, because you're going to have injuries, and it would be great if you had 6 Chris Tanevs on your team to be able to just kind of spot in for each other if somebody goes down, but it's not realistic. So hopefully it's just somebody who's able to be serviceable and step in if needed, and again, just give you a little bit more depth going into the playoffs.
Here's a guy, his name's come up a few times. He makes quite a bit more than league min, but we know it works here. What about Luke Schenn?
I knew you were going to throw that name out there, and it's the same thing as the guys I think you just mentioned. I think Luke Schenn is fantastic. He's been a great pro, over 1,000 games, like, just a warrior. And when he was brought in here a few seasons ago for a second tour of duty, I thought he was fantastic playing alongside Morgan Rielly, and I had wished that they were able to re-sign him, but how are you going to make that work? Like, it's probably the truth is it's probably one or the other. If you bring in a guy like Luke Schenn, who makes, again, I don't know off the top of my head, but
I think it's like 275 or something.
Yeah, like in and around there. Like, if you bring that in, you're not trading for a viable third line center. I think you're probably, if you trade for a centerman, it's probably more of a 4 who can turn into a 3.
Yeah,
you gotta pick and choose. And so, I think based on where we were at, giving our grades and what's needed, I think, to me, the third line center is more pressing. Like, it's a big drop off after Matthews and Tavares. It's a big drop off to number 3. And I'm not, even though it's certainly still a big drop off from McCabe and Tanev down to Benoit and Timmins, like, it just for some reason it just concerns me less. And so I think, again, like, just bring in another body who gives you another option rather than Phil Myers, who's also, like, I haven't minded his game at all this season. Like, he's been fine every time he's come into the lineup, in my opinion. But like, you just kind of want another body that's in there that can step into your lineup if needed.
100%. And, it's going to be interesting how they make it work in terms of money because, and so I double checked. Luke Schenn makes 2.75. He's in year 2 of 3 of that deal. Famously wasn't able to get the same deal done with the Maple Leafs, and that stung because he was so good in that playoffs when he did come back. But yeah, I mean, you got Morgan Rielly playing next to Phil Myers, and it's like, oh God, like, are we gonna have to do this in the playoffs? Like Benoit and Timmins on the bottom pair, like, just to me, it's not great. You'd love to push a guy like Morgan or OEL down to a third pair. OEL was famously so good in Florida when he was playing third pair minutes, so you'd like to do that. But you're right, like, it's going to be tricky. They're going to have to make the money work somehow.
Yeah, and I hate to I feel like I came in here and was just a downer on like, oh, let's trade for Brayden Schenn and Mikko Rantanen, and then we're going to bring in Carson Soucy on the back end. Like, I was like, hey, I would love to be able to come in here and say that's all going to happen. Leafs just scored, by the way.
Oh my God,
Max Domi just got one.
I guess he's not going anywhere.
Cancel the podcast. We gotta re-record here. But yeah, I would love to bring any of those guys, but they're tied up against the cap, as we know.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be moving out a ton of salary, as we know. Like, you're not selling, so like you're bringing guys in, and there's only so much you can really do. And again, there's only so many guys out there. It's driving the price way up, and I'll finish on this. I'd rather have them do nothing than completely mortgage their future for a third line centerman.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're going to pay the steep price, you need to know, you need some cost certainty going forward. You need to know that player can make an impact. Just not sold if Brayden Schenn is that guy. I mean, I know I was talking him up earlier because I'm trying to talk myself into the deal, but it's just, I don't know. I'm kind of with you here. Like, there's not a lot available. I wonder about a team like Seattle. Yanni Gourde's a guy we haven't talked about. Brandon Tanev. We could we could unite the Tanev brothers, but also on the back end there. And I know they really like this player, so he's probably not going anywhere. But what would it take to get an Adam Larson from that team? Like, he is just, and
he's solid. He's not going to be a Leaf because they can't afford him. But like, yeah, I agree with you. If somebody could pluck him out, like, that's a huge add to your top four come playoff time. He's been so solid out there. But in terms of guys who maybe are a little more realistic for the Leafs, like, hey, you know what? Maybe you can make Yanni Gourde work, and he's not exactly like the 6'5" killer that you picture the prototypical third line center being, but he's been there before. He's a winner.
He's a water bug.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's, if you can make that work at the right price, and if Seattle's willing to retain a little bit, then perhaps that's something you can explore. Brandon Tanev, same thing. Like, he's obviously a guy who brings a different element. He's going to run guys. He's going to be a pest. Like, but again, it's what's the price that you're willing to pay for those guys? Because in neither case am I willing to give up a first round pick.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's when you start to look towards a package deal where it's like Gourde and Alexiak, for example, or in Philadelphia, maybe it's Ristolainen and Lawton, and it's like you get two, and then you're more willing to give up that piece because at least, your risk is sort of spread out between the two players rather than all focused on the one guy that you're bringing in. So it's interesting. We'll see what they do here as the deadline approaches, coming up very quickly. I feel like the buzz leading up to the deadline has been minimal because we're just coming out of the Four Nations face-off. It kind of took precedence here with the media cycle, but we're back, and we've only got less than a week until the trade deadline, so we're really looking forward to that. I did want to go through an ideal lineup for the playoffs here. I don't know if we really need to. We've kind of talked about, like, we need a third line center, and we really want the Maple Leafs to get a depth defenseman. So really, like, the main thing is going to be what the third line looks like. To me, it's going to be Järnkrok, a guy who they bring in, and maybe it's Domi. What's that?
2-0, by the way.
Okay, yeah, we gotta cancel. We gotta get out of here.
and it's Timmins. So no, they're not bringing another defenseman now. So now Timmins is just, he's going to stay in the top six. But Yeah,
Yeah.
no, sorry to cut you off. I
No,
agree.
no, that I
It's
need
all
that.
about the third line center, and it's probably it's Yarncroke, player X in the middle, whoever that is, and then who am I not thinking of? Like,
I mean, it could be like a Holmberg, a Robertson, Dewar.
that's the one. Actually, that's one guy we didn't really talk about. That, and my thoughts on Robertson, but I want to get your opinion. Sorry to hijack being the host for a second here. I know you're trying to wrap up, but like, what do you think based on all we talked about? Which is, I kind of feel a little bad for your listeners because I feel like we just kind of were like, yeah, like I'll make some minimal moves, but like,
Yeah.
Based on what we think realistically is going to happen, and based on the construction of this lineup, like, do you realistically see Nick Robertson playing Game 1 of the playoffs? Like, where do you think he stands?
I gotta say, the answer is still no. Given even given the last 4 games or whatever, where it seems like he's putting a goal in every night, it just doesn't feel like he's going to be on that playoff roster. And whether that means he's traded or not, I don't know. I think, honestly, what they probably do is they acquire a guy who pushes him out of the lineup because he can't be pushed down because he's not going to play on the fourth line. So it probably pushes him out of the lineup. If I were to guess, he's probably the 13th forward come playoff time. And then next year, you've still got him. He's still here. He's not as disgruntled anymore. He had made a trade request at the start of the year, but he's since taken that back and has said that he just wants to be here and focus on being here. Maybe it's not the worst thing going forward if you've got Nick Robertson again next season for another full season, and he scores a bit of depth scoring. I don't know. It just feels like his value isn't very high. It's almost at an all-time low, honestly, despite these last few games, and it just feels like we've been through this before, but they're also not going to get much in return. So it just feels like it's going to be the same thing. They're going to acquire a player. It's going to push him out of the lineup. He'll come in if they need some depth scoring or if someone gets hurt. But I just don't see him in Game 1 of the playoffs. It just doesn't make sense to me. He's not, like, unfortunately, because he's a smaller player, he does have all the talent in the world. But unfortunately, like, unless you are a 95th to 99th percentile player at that size, like, it just doesn't work, especially in the playoffs. So, that's what I think.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that. I think, if you bring in a player for that third line role, he's not going down to your fourth line. So I think you're bang on. Like, he's out of your lineup, and I think that's most likely what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think. Like, I've gone kind of back and forth where certainly he does not have much trade value. I wouldn't say it's like he's got 11 goals this year. I'm sure there's a team out there that says we could bring him in at, trade a 5th round pick for him and bring him in. And, maybe it's Seattle. Maybe Seattle says, hey, like, we can throw you on our second line and maybe he scores 18 goals. Like, I think that's entirely possible. But like, you're going to, trade him just for the sake of letting him go and get a fresh start somewhere else, or maybe he's just a throw in a deal. But whatever the case is, like this, I mean, and this will be a discussion I'm sure we'll have after the season when we do our annual Leafs year in review.
Yeah.
He won't. I don't think he's back on this team next year, but that's something to talk about later.
I don't know. The way I look at it is like he's not going to fetch a huge return.
Yeah.
The only reason to trade him is to do right by a player. And I just don't know if this new management group is interested in that. I feel like they look at him purely as an asset, and it's like, next year, maybe he figures it out, and it's just, it is a bit of a long shot, and I won't be talked into it again of Nick Robertson being, this 30 goal scorer because it's not going to happen, right? Like, I would be thrilled if it did, but I just don't think it is. I feel like going forward, he's just going to be a guy who gets mixed in. And that's why I'm saying, like, it wouldn't shock me if he's still on this team next season, which is, interesting because even a couple months ago, like, I think my opinion was different on this. I probably would have said, he's gone by the deadline, but I don't know. Like, it just feels like he's fitting in a way, but also he's not going to be in the playoff lineup. I don't know. He's a very interesting player, like the way that it's been handled, but at the same time, like, he's not that old, and like bring him back next year, see what he can do. I don't know. I'm not talking myself into this though. I'm just saying, like, that's what I think they're gonna do. If it makes sense and another team really wants him, like say it is Seattle, and they're like, hey, we do want Robertson, like that would put us over the edge to get the deal done, then sure, like of course include him. But I just don't think it makes sense to trade him if his value is only, a 4th round pick or something. Just doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, hey, fair enough. Like I think maybe more along the lines I was thinking of is like it's Robertson and a 3rd round pick or something for Brandon Tanev, like just off the top of my head, trying to think of something, but like,
yeah,
who knows? I think my stance has softened on him a little bit. Like I think I used to be a little more passionate about where I saw or didn't see Nick Robertson, and I think, like I think when it comes to the playoff time, I would, my view is consistent of like I don't think he fits in.
Yeah,
but yeah, like hey, if he was to be brought back next season, you're just like, hey, you can, until the trade deadline and we bring someone in, like, can he play on the 3rd line and scores 12 goals? Like, I guess so. So. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's doing that. I guess he can. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, that there's some sort of offense there, right? Like clearly. So I don't know. And even the other night though, too, like another reason why I'm like, there's no way he's going to be in the playoff lineup, because when he's at his most effective and he's feeling himself and he's scoring goals, he's shooting it in the net, like that's Nick Robertson. Like when he's at his best, like he's doing those things. He's as soon as it's on his stick, it's on the net, right? Like he's engaged offensively. But the other night, I think it was in the New York game, I believe. He's at the blue line and he is feeling himself, right? So he tries to make this little like flutter pass across the line, gets picked off right away. They go down and score. I think that was the Cooley goal. And it's like, you just like, Berube doesn't have time for those kind of decisions, like the juice isn't worth the squeeze with him. I think I would say it just feels like, it's never going to work here. But that being said, like, again, it wouldn't shock me if he's back next year, just because he's a guy, you kind of know what he does and you hope that, he could do more.
Yeah.
But yeah, not in the playoff lineup.
I think when it comes to him, and, this will be my last point on Nick Robertson, and I tore myself apart with one of my old, hot takes exposed with the Seth Jones, Nathan MacKinnon, TV debacle, as I'll call it, from 12 years ago on CTV. Like another point where I will look back and say I was wrong, and that's going back to my scouting days. Like I think I used to really try and be a little more progressive when it came to size and
Mm-hmm.
Openly advocate for what I thought at the time was like, yeah, there's room in the game now for small players and more skill and more speed. And while I think in the regular season that's true, like I will completely do a 180 on that and say, come playoff time, like they're just it isn't. Like it's
Yeah.
You look at the teams who win the Stanley Cup every year, whether it's Florida or Vegas or Tampa or whoever it is, like typically their defense are huge. Typically there's a strong physical presence, guys who are just willing to do whatever it takes. Like there's still that intimidation factor. There's still that toughness, that size that is so important come playoff time. We just saw it again, like obviously a little bit different, but Four Nations face off. Like that was a tough, like 4 games that each of those teams, Canada and the US in particular, played against each other. Like it's big boy hockey. And you can get through the regular season, 82 games of just, small skilled guys playing on your third line, but come playoff time, like it's just, those just aren't the guys who are effective. And so going back again, throwing myself under the bus from my scouting days, like that's something I think that, yeah, come playoff time, it's just, you have to recognize it's a different game.
Yeah, 100%. And like, I don't think you should fault yourself for that take, because there was a time where the NHL was developing in that way, where it's like there is room for these smaller, more skilled players. But yeah, over the past, I don't know, it feels like 5 to 8 years, it's just been the bigger you are, the more you can bully. Whistles go away in the playoffs, And, that's what happens. But I think, and I said this earlier, I think you can make it as a small player in this league if you're in the 95th percentile of skill.
Cole Caulfield, guy's got, what does he have, 31 goals or around 30 goals this season? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you're small, but even those guys, it's you're not getting knocked off the puck. Usually they've still got a bit of a gritty side to them. So I completely agree. But yeah, for those guys who, you're not scoring that much per year, you don't have a physical presence to you. You're just a guy. And there's a lot of room for guys. And as I've said a few times throughout this podcast now, there's 32 teams in this league. There's a lot of guys who are making NHL paycheck that don't necessarily deserve to be there. Come playoff time, everybody's got to be bought in. Everybody's got to know their role. So there can't be any passengers. And Pittsburgh just scored at that. So we're missing another one.
we got to go. We got to wrap this up. Good place to end it. There are a lot of guys in the league. We'll see which guys the Maple Leafs bring in before the deadline on Friday, which is fast approaching. Can't wait. We'll see what they do. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the podcast, and we'll talk to you next week after the deadline.